So we focus on the economy, setting the agenda for the government. We've got Tokwe Fashwa here with us. He's an economist and a former presidential candidate of the ANRP. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Yeah, good morning. It's great to be here.
We've been speaking about this for decades, diversifying the economy, growing the economy beyond oil. Can we achieve this?
Yes, well, it's going to take a lot of hard work, a lot of, a different kind of mindset entirely. There are two things I'd like to actually explain. When government talks about diversification, usually they're talking about diversifying their income sources, right? So diversifying income sources is different from diversifying an economy. An economy can be diversified, of course, along product lines, but also spatially. And spatial diversification is the one I think we should also focus on in terms of, for example, outside Lagos, Port Harcourt, Kano, if you like, to an extent, go towards Aba, yeah? Very little else is happening in the country. Ogun State is stepping up as well. But a good economy is one in which a lot is happening in different places, and essentially, what that means is that the economy is actually increasingly self-reliant in spite of having to play the game with the WTO.
If I can jump
in which case, whatever it is you need within the economy, you can get within the economy.
So
keep the money within the family.
Can they achieve this via their agri-economic policies in different states?
Well, it could be done, only that, truth be told, you can't diversify the economy into agri. As a matter of fact, diversification is about, you have primary product, secondary product, tertiary products. The real diversification is about moving from primary into secondary, into tertiary. You don't diversify from one primary product into another primary product. So the whole idea with agric is the way it will work is when you begin to talk about the value chains in terms of are we processing, So yeah, there was a time we came up with this idea of tomato, adding value to tomato and all of that. Dangote has a factory somewhere in Kano, I think, somewhere in Kano. I've passed there before, but it had to shut down after a while, So, but along the Kano-Katsina axis, there's huge tomato processing going on there. The man in Erisco also is trying to start a factory there, but hasn't quite kicked off. So what we should be thinking about is, first of all, with our Greek is number one, feed yourself, right? Try and feed yourself. If we talk about having food belt, and we talk about having this vast land, 923,000 square kilometers, and in terms of arable land that's cultivated is about 10%, as against what happens in South Africa, South Africa is, the last time I checked, about 82% of the land was cultivated. All right. Now, so what that means is that, first of all, think about, feeding your people, growing the things that they eat, then secondly, adding value. So, but in terms of diversification, we have to think beyond agri. There's so much more we can do.
Well, let's head to Abuja. Paul Olache, also an economist, joins us from our studios there. Well, Paul, thank you for joining us as well today. Well, in continuation for the agenda setting mode for the incoming government concerning the economy, what do you think they need to really address headlong?
Thank you so much once again. The next 4 years, what I think government should be considering is the issue of development. Government plan, as stated in Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, is to see how Nigeria will come out of recession and possibly have some level of growth. This document is supposed to be replicated in 36 states of the Federation and the FCT. But as we speak now, less than 10 states have adopted the issues in Economic and Growth Plan in their domestic life, at the state level. So what you see is that even recent reports released by the National Bureau of Statistics also has indicated that many of our states are not doing well at all. So if you look at what federal government is saying and is doing in order to bring economic prosperity to the people, it might take years upon years before we get to that destination. And the state government, who, in another hand, are supposed supposed to also work alongside with the vision of federal government is also, many of them are also not working in that regard. So for me, I'm hoping that in the next 4 years, I will see conversation around development. And if you just want to grow the economy, even when we had 7% GDP growth rate, the then Minister of Finance said, and of course backed by the figures from Nigeria Bureau of Statistics, that most of the growth were jobless. How much more now that unemployment rate, according to your report, when you were quoting the National Bureau of Statistics, that unemployment rate is perhaps the highest in history, 23.1%. And mark you, that is not on the entire population of the country. It is only on the labor force. Labor force is about 80 million people out of 198 million people. So you have 180 million people who are either not qualified to work or not ready to work. So the burden of 180 million people plus 23.1% of 80 million people is on the remaining number of people. So for me, if you want to make policy, if you want to implement policies that will change Nigeria, it must be evident in job, job, and job. And to make job and job and job a reality for Nigeria, what will people do? Many people in the studio, apart from Mr. Pashua, that put on what we call in Nigeria native attire. You put off English, we call it English dress. And myself also in the studio in Abuja. The truth is that all of us are buying material that is guaranteeing job to people outside. Does it mean that we don't love Nigeria? Far from it. The question is, where's the infrastructure and what we make Nigerians to be kept at the factory? Countries around the world that have huge population, one of which or two of which even have population bigger than the entire continent Africa, India and China. Huge population, because I've heard a number of people say, oh, Nigeria cannot be good because our population is so big. Hey, India has population bigger than Africa. China population bigger than Africa. You know the truth? They are currently going bigger than 6%, which is 300% of Nigeria's GDP growth rate of just 2.01% thereabout, which was even a decline from 2.38% that we had year on year in the last quarter compared to what we had, in the previous quarter of 2018 compared to what we have in the newly released report by National Bureau of Statistics. So what have they done? In the 70s and the 80s, when India came to mind, when India is mentioned, what was on our mind? It was magical power, a country where you have Bollywood and so many other things, but there was not something significant that you can actually attach India to. The same with China. You will liken China to a country with manufacturing of substandard product. Fast forward 2005 to 2006, the pyramid of these countries have changed. China became country that you refer to as the production hub of the world. India, on the other hand, became country of ICT center of the world. Today, in the 70s and 80s, when you think of Nigeria, and you think of Nigeria in 2005 and 2010, what exactly has changed? To 2019 that we are right now. In fact, many professors across the globe in economics believe that Nigerian forefathers live better than the Nigerians of nowadays.
Let me ask you this question.
What is their per capita income?
Let me ask you this, Mr. Alaje. Let me ask you this. You kept talking about the fact that government should focus on development. What exactly are you talking about when you talk about the government focusing on development? Some have said, it's important for government to diversify the Nigerian economy, and of course you heard Mr. Pashua also make such similar allusions. So when you talk about development, what are you talking about? Is it human capital development, infrastructural development, or what else?
Yeah, development has 3 to 4 key areas, one of which is economy, which is growth. So if you are focusing on growth as we have been focusing in recent time in the country, you are only going to score between 25% to 33% at best, assuming that you achieve that 100%. But you need to focus beyond that. You now need to focus on human capital development, which is now beyond growth. So if you grow the economy and the people, let me mention this, over 13 million Nigerians are out of school. Not my figures. This was the statement made by Minister of Education when he was with Senate just last week. 13 million people. Minister of Health mentioned that Nigeria has failed in terms of health. And how do you build a population that is illiterate population and also unhealthy population? Which kind of country do we have? 30 million people in the next 10 years. We should not be surprised. We might as well be grooming those who will be fueling insecurity in the nearest future. We need to do something and check our ranking in Human Development Index. Human Development Index is what measures how countries have developed their citizens, or in terms of citizens and capacity of citizens all across the globe. Nigeria was rated 152 out of 180 countries. So, and that included what is happening to income, how much are people earning. As of today, minimum wage, even though it's passed, but labor is yet to receive officially a salary from most of the state and federal government. 30,000 naira, even when you use CBN exchange rate, is not up to $100 a month. So that on the side. Secondly, what is happening to education? What is happening to health? Combination of these three is what we tell us if we are building a country that the rest of the world will love to live in. But if they are not building that, then we will still be complaining and saying that we need to do something about economy. Development is what many countries of the world have agreed that for us to grow, we need to take care of development. That on the side. What about justice system? Because development goes beyond economic indicators. How about our justice system? How many people believe in us that when they come to Nigeria to invest, they will have equity and fairness in our country? Are we even treating our fellow countrymen when it comes to business transaction and the issues are taken to court? So for us, we believe strongly that if Nigerian government, past and present, want this country to come out of the woods, then we must change our narrative from just economic issues or growth-based issues to development issues. And I also support the issue of diversification. Unfortunately, we have been diversifying the economy from primary to primary. So when you say primary, what is the key ingredient? The nature. So if you have crude oil, if it's not deposited by nature, then there is no crude oil. The same with agriculture. If there is no sunlight the way it's practiced in Nigeria, then there is no farming. What countries have done, China, India, and Indonesia, countries with huge population, with by far over 250% consistently GDP growth rate, than Nigeria, who is just approximately 200 million people, is that they've gone beyond wanting to grow the economy to what they must do to keep their people a job. This is what happens when you import a shoe from outside Nigeria. You get the shoe, it looks nice on you, but you are going to lose jobs because people consistently are producing shoe and they are manufacturing shoe. They are happy because when you mention Nigeria, what comes to their mind is that, wow, that is huge consumption. Nigeria is a consuming country. They have huge population. That is huge market. I'm sure many Nigerians are familiar with the word huge market. Huge market should start in our heart. If Nigerians are not the ones that are producing for this market, if the rest of the world, I am not saying we should produce all that we need. Of course, no country can produce all that it requires. Now, and it does not mean that Nigeria is not exporting. But let me shock you. The mobile phone you have with you is more than several barrels of crude oil. How much is a barrel of crude oil today? Be charitable, say $80 per barrel. How much is your mobile phone? If your mobile phone is more than 36,000 naira, that is 360,000 naira. We have phones that are like that, equivalent of 1,000 US dollars. How many crude oil, barrels of crude oil would you exchange for a mobile phone? That's on the side. You may also want to check complexity index, economic complexity index of country. Nigeria was rated poorly. What does it mean? You can be producing things, but how complex, how much of knowledge have you contributed to what you produce? So if Nigeria is exporting yam to the rest of the world, for instance, or you are exporting tomatoes to the rest of the world, for instance, we are saying how much of unique knowledge, scarce resource knowledge have you contributed to it? And for us to get this done, for us to get diversification done, particularly beyond rhetorics of primary to primary diversification, and you are looking at tangible, sustainable diversification, you must get the key thing, infrastructure sector, very key. And this is what I want to advise also, Mr. President, to consider. Key persons in your infrastructure ministries, which includes Ministry of Power, Works and Housing, which includes the Ministry of Transport, and of course, who will finance them? The Ministry of Finance.
All right, thank you. Please hold that thought, Mr. Alaji. Let me bring it quickly to Mr. Fashua here. You know, both of you clearly agree on this idea of building the economy and, of course, diversification. There is hardly any state in Nigeria that doesn't have
the capacity to sustain itself. I mean, given its mineral resources and all of that, from all kinds of information that you economists have thrown at us. But then it perhaps comes to the laws. Some state governors have said that they are hampered by the laws to be able to do some things, on their own, to develop their states and build their economic base. How do you react to that?
Is that tenable?
Well, indeed, some of the laws, but the other day I did an analysis of the 68 items in the exclusive list, and you couldn't find 15 of those items to relocate to the states. Most of the items, 68 items list, exclusive list, should actually be handled by the federal government. We're talking about things like defense, like customs, like currency, and so on. It's not the business of the state. But we also have seen that at least 10 of them can be clearly pulled out. For example, of course, things like state police state police should actually happen. Land, actually, according to the Land Use Act, every land belongs to the state right now, all right? But people are trying to revert to the old customary ways where families used to own land. And there's a reason why that 1979 law came in order to ensure that we're not just having a scenario where we remain in some sort of feudalism, where families would say, we own this entire expanse of land, the state cannot come near that, and then you see a perpetuation of a few families who continue to hold land. And the state moved in to say, the federal government, under Obasanjo then, to say that the state should own the land so that from time to time you can reallocate if you like. So everybody gets a 99 years lease now. It hasn't been tested, because the first test will come in 2076. The year 2076 is when the first set of documents will expire, and they ought to be renewed. So whoever is around in Nigeria then, should have to deal with that. What do we do? Is the government going to say they are not renewing? Are there going to be legal cases and so on and so forth? So, however, the other day, Minister Fashola actually said that, that there's nothing stopping any state from producing power. They've seen it. Nothing stopping any state. Kano is getting involved in rail system, which is one of the exclusive. Kano, Rivers, Lagos, even though different stages of abandonment, truth be told. And of course, what pains me is also that all of the developments in this area, we tend to externalize them. So we're talking about achievements in rail sector today, but it's basically Chinese people coming with their money, they lend us the money, they bring the expertise, they bring the equipment, they even bring the staff. The train between Abuja and Kaduna is driven till tomorrow by a Chinese man. The engineers on the train are Chinese. We just go in there, And so by the time we started having insecurity along that line, all of us troop in there. We clamber over ourselves. The stations are in different stages of disrepair. You need to see the rock big scrum to get on the train sometimes. Some boys begin to hoard the tickets. We just bring our Nigerianness and put it there. You know what I'm saying? But let no state governor bring any excuses, right? Because I believe strongly, a lot of people want to be state governors. They've not actually thought about what's up. You know what I'm saying? And so I was reading somewhere recently.
You said that the governors, they shouldn't bring in excuses.
They shouldn't bring in excuses.
But they will also tell you
that... Look, we're doing what they can do. So, okay, two things. If we're talking about the 68 item, the exclusive versus the concurrent list, what is obvious is that, like I said before, you can't move the entire 68 items. You can move about 10 or max 15. And I can begin to mention them now. Things like prison, things like transport, like rail system, things like power. Of course, you can do it at the state level. And I'm also telling you that some states have already begun to take the initiatives.
No, I think there's a limit
even the
for
issue
the power
of
sector.
There's a certain limit on what you can produce and transmit at the same time.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But let me start it. Let us see that you're doing that. But what I'm thinking is that the concurrent list itself, if it's that few at about 26 items, if it's that few, perhaps the states should sit down to say, how can we expand this list? If indeed under federalism, the states should be doing a lot more than the federal government. But of course, you can't, sometimes I've heard people say they want to take over defense, they want to take over currency. You can't take over some of those things. You can't take over customs. You can't take over immigration. You can't take over the issuing of passports.
How about solid mineral deposits?
Solid mineral rights is also another thing the states can actually get involved. And some of them do get involved. So now, there's of course the politics of interacting with the federal government and all of that to know how much you can do within your area. The truth right now is that most of our solid minerals is still comatose, all right? So Paul was speaking about the mobile phone. One of the key ingredients in these mobile phones that we take around is called coltan, columbite and tantalite, found almost everywhere in the middle belt of Nigeria, all right? And these are very precious metals, and it gets into every phone. Now, what we see is a scenario where we got sometimes Chinese and Indian, businessmen who come into Nigeria and they tap into the illegal market, the artisanal market. And, just stay in their hotels and they get all those guys to go in the bushes and bring all of those in the, by the time you're giving someone $200, $300, in Nigeria, it feels like it's on top of the world. But by the time these metals or these minerals move away from here to where they need to get to, become something else. In fact, as of 2012, the biggest, and that was the time we did the biggest amount of business with China in terms of what we exported to China. Most of it were all these metals, all these solid minerals, but they are largely unregulated. Governor Fayemi did some work in that sector, but I'm not sure he was able to conclude before he became governor again, and that's sad because continuity of policy, and that was going to be very crucial to Nigeria. However, I'm also of the opinion that, when we talk about development, like Paul was talking about, one thing I've seen as an economic philosopher of my own little standing, is you have to meet development somewhere in the middle of the way. In which case, the world has gone so way up. We're talking about driverless cars now. We're talking about all sorts of crazy things happening in the rest of the world. And here we are. Well, the other time I made a comment that Nigeria, we're talking about the 5G, right? And China is winning the 5G war. America is fighting back and saying, criticizing Huawei. Like Paul said, Huawei was a company, many people won't want to use a Huawei phone, even today in Nigeria. But Huawei is winning the 5G war for China. All right, but here we are. The best we can do is try to sell some solid minerals to them, try to sell some crude oil, and perhaps of late, people were toying with the idea of selling marijuana. And we want to be able to sell these things in their raw form and afford those things that the world is producing. No. What is most crucial now, which is part of what I was pushing during my campaign, is that, look, we've got an advantage, and our advantage is our youth bulge. 5 million people in universities and polytechnics and elsewhere, 5 million, 10 million Nigerian youth or more, box-trapping Nigerian youth who are very imaginative, passionate, very energetic, and so on. We need to be pressed into service. Those are the people that will do the job. All right, so the other day, I was moving from Katsina Ala Road into Obubra, going towards Calabar. And, this road was, of course, like most other roads in Nigeria, in different stages of disrepair. It oughtn't have got to that level if you understand that with the developmental deficit that you have, you cannot wait to be issuing contracts, and you have to tell students, even in your engineering departments of different universities, that they will be in charge of fixing some of those roads. And they're learning through that process, and they're getting paid.
That's another kettle of fish entirely, the tertiary institutions. But let's see how much we can do in the next 5 minutes. Paul, now, do you get the sense that, the government or the authorities or the drafters of the ARGP understand the gravity of the challenge that we face with a view to addressing them? Yes, they've fallen short of the projections initially, but the projections that you've seen in there, does it strike you as though, even if we implement all of them, maybe say to 70%, how far can we go with that?
First, I think very soon the lifespan of ARGP will come to an end. But ARGP already told us how to mark its scripts. ARGP is like an examiner that says, if you answer this question as a country and you can achieve this point, then you will score certain goals. So currently, we ought to have about 4% GDP growth rate. We are doing 50% of that or a little bit low. As we speak, unemployment figure, according to ARGP, should be lower, and we should have better inflation rate. So most of the projections that we have in ARGP have actually not been achieved. But there is something which we seem to have done better on, which is ease of doing business. Because of administrative restructuring and administrative reforms, which affected particularly, say, Corporate Affairs Commission. Because to register business in Nigeria now, business registration is much better than what we had, and also ease of paying taxes. Countries like Rwanda, which of course is smaller is not as exposed, the not huge mass land that we have, etc., in Nigeria, is doing much, much better among the top 10 in Africa. What have they done? What have they done differently? There is a governing document that's beyond the federal government. It covers the entire federation. The same with countries that I mentioned earlier, China, India, Indonesia. Countries from time to time look at what is the holistic goals that we want to achieve. For me, I think the next document government will release should go beyond recovery plan. It should be development based. And to be development based means that local government, state government, and federal government must agree that the most important factor to all Nigerians is their economy. In terms of economy, it means how much job they can get. What will be the value of Naira? Most international community today is saying that they are not comfortable with Nigeria having two exchange rates, one for central bank and also another one for import-export window. Perhaps you might want to argue what is also happening at the parallel market. So you have almost more than 50 Naira difference in exchange rate within the same country. Some of them are even arguing that the exchange rate we have in Nigeria today might be 20% lower than higher than what we are projecting. And you should not be surprised that because the driving force of foreign direct investment in Nigeria is not real sector. It is portfolio investment. So if we reduce our interest rate by marginal 1% or 2%, we have implication on exchange of investment outflow out of the country.
All right, Paul.
So for me, we need to bring it back here. Country holistically, and this will involve everyone,
right?
Not just federal government alone, but state government, and more importantly, the local government.
Yeah, but Mr. Fashua, let me bring this to you. I mean, a good thing you are aware, still in politics. Now, the questions that time and again people ask is, how do we go beyond the point where private sector investors know that whichever policy, whichever government has in place can stand the test of time? Because if people keep having this policy somersault, it confuses a lot of investors.
Yes, this is a fact, policy somersault, discontinuity, and so on. I doubt if we would be able anytime soon to get beyond that. What will be a tragedy, though, is if within the same party and the same government you have policy discontinuity. Luckily for us, we've got the same government continuing, so you'd expect that the same policies will be pushed forward. But we've seen, at least at the state level, instances where a government comes in and within the same party, and just a new person coming in, it stops all the projects of the other people. However, back to what Paul was saying, I would say the first thing about the ERGP, that the ERGP sounds very much like another budget document, trying to plan for everything. You can't see the punch in the ERGP. 3.5% projection, not where we're supposed to be. Like I said earlier on, even within Africa, countries are growing at 8%. India is growing at 7.5 to 8%, a 3 trillion economy. China is growing at 6.3%, a 15 trillion economy. The US is growing at 4.2%, a 17 trillion economy. What it means is that these countries, China, India, and US, are adding multiples of Nigeria's whole economy to their economy every year. China is adding 3 of Nigeria's economy to its economy every year. That's a cause for concern. So we need to first of all, begin to think big. We need to think big for ourselves. Set double-digit targets for yourselves in terms of growth, which will dovetail into development. There's a new way of reimagining the economy, job creation for people and all of that. Now, even within the public sector, I will say, I go against the grain and I've got all these ideas out there in the open. Within the public sector, there's opportunity for employment in terms of creation of public goods. Recently, a report came out in the Punch that most Nigerian state governors have not employed teachers since 2008. You know what I'm saying? And then you've got a problem. When I was campaigning, I went to the north of this country, especially, and so on. Even in the south, no teachers in some of the schools, 0 teachers. And then you say you don't have jobs for people. So we've got the jobs for the people, but this is and we can project from there.
This is a matter that we're consistently going to focus on as much as we can, because we all need to pull together and see how we could grow the economy and get jobs out there to the people. But I'd like to thank you, Tokwe Fashua and Paul Alaje, both economists, for coming on the program this session.